Hello BookTube, it's Roz, and this is the second of my monthly D&D videos. That's Delights and Discoveries, with sometimes the odd disappointment thrown in. And so, what did I read in July, and what was good and what was not so good, and what was kind of new and interesting? So I read 7 books in July, 4 novels, one play, a couple of non-fiction, and then also I did some added little Jane Austen bits that I'll get to in a minute. So, number one delight of July, and same as last July, and I hope next July, is the fact that we had a bit of a Jane Austen feast. But I'm going to kind of skip over that fairly swiftly because I've done a couple of videos about that, and also some things that are on Tilly's shelf that I did jointly with her. So I won't linger. I won't linger on that overly much. But one of the things that I like about readathons and read-alongs and all those booktubey things that I've got into is the way they do get me to do sort of things slightly differently from what I would otherwise, I suppose. And yeah, I that's what I've kind of particularly appreciated, I suppose, about Jane Austen July this year. And I made sure that I kind of got ahead in June with reading. Like, I try, as you know, if you watch my channel regularly, I try to read some poetry each month. I try to read a new country, somewhere I haven't read something from before, each month. But I kind of got ahead with that in June so that I could indulge myself with Jane Austen somewhat, in a way that, yeah, I wouldn't normally read several things that all kind of interconnect with each other, I suppose. And yeah, so of my Jane Austen July things, there was Miss Austen, which was the kind of current novel inspired by Jane Austen, and I did a video about that with Tilly and picked it apart a bit. I'm afraid I wouldn't go so far as to say it was one of the disappointments of July, but it just kind of reminds me that I'd rather read Jane Austen herself than something inspired by her, I think. But I'll try again next July. See what I might read the other Bennet sister next July. We'll see. I always kind of travel hopefully, if that makes sense. The play that I read this month, which I talk about on with Tilly for our Discussing Drama series, and that's on Tilly's channel, Tilly's Shelf. That was really enjoyable. It wasn't, I wouldn't perhaps go as far as to describe it as a delight of the month, but it was yeah, discovery, I suppose, because it's the play that's features in Mansfield Park, Lovers' Vows by Elizabeth Inchbald, and kind of realising that there was sort of successful commercial playwrights, I suppose, at that time that were female. That was a discovery, I think. Yeah, for me. Perhaps the most disappointing bit of my Jane Austen July, and in a way that's the wrong word, I don't know, was that I read some of her juvenilia, History of England and Love and Friendship, and like I'd heard other people enthuse so much about what fun they'd got out of reading Jane Austen's juvenilia, you know, people like Katie books and things or whatever, and so I think I was hoping to enjoy it more than I actually did. You know, it is fun, and it's kind of about as funny and clever as you'd expect something written by some funny, clever teenager, yeah, in their early teens, who's going to turn out to be a good author later, about how as good as you'd expect that to be. But I have to say, I thought I might read the whole book of it, and actually after a couple of things I thought, yeah, no, that's enough for now. So yeah, not a disappointment, but not a wonderful revelation, put it that way. What was a joy and a delight, and probably the greatest delight of the month, I have to be honest, was rereading Emma. And I am not a great one for rereading things, if I'm honest. And I would say that Jane Austen is one of the very few authors that I positively choose to reread, and even then I don't do it often, so that it's good to get pushed into doing that and then have all the fun of it. Now, a lot of people read Emma, this Jane Austen July, because it was one of Katie and Marissa's two sort of chosen books for read-alongs. And someone somewhere said something about how they didn't like Emma because nothing happens. And I just thought, how could you say nothing happens in Emma? I mean, I know it's set in one small village, and I know that perhaps it's characters and dialogue are what matters most in it, rather than sort of plot. But this story has there's two kind of mysteries or secrets that are kind of key to the plot of this of Emma, and one of them, I'm trying to avoid spoilers here. One of them, we as the reader kind of work it out fairly early on, but Emma as the character takes kind of all the way almost to the end of the book to work it out, and of course that's really good fun because you have all the pleasure of sort of feeling like you're smarter and more perceptive and have more insight than this sort of clever, delightful main protagonist has. So that's fun. But the other secret, the other mystery, is you go through the whole book and get that revelation again close to the end, and it's like the best kind of detective fiction in that you're not really going to guess it, I think, unless you're very smart. I don't know, I certainly didn't the first time I read it. You're not really going to guess it, but when you find it out, you don't think, oh my goodness, how ridiculous, where's that plot development come from? On the contrary, you realise that there have been clues all the way through that you and Emma, in fact, have missed. So this is this really satisfying, oh my goodness, yes, of course, I should have realised that. And of course, when you reread it, you can really enjoy spotting all those the little clues to what is going to turn out to be the truth. So, nothing happens in Emma. Balderdash, lots happens. It's a very well constructed novel. The other thing that I read for Jane Austen July was Lucy Worsley's Jane Austen at Home, and I really appreciated reading that. It was one of my two non-fiction reads because, as I said, I'm not a great one for rereading, and but I quite... Well, what am I trying to say here? When I read things, if it's a topic or from a place perhaps I'm unfamiliar with, I'll do a little reading around, get a little bit of context, even if it's just a bit of Googling. When I do this at Scallydandle reads, where I'm reading from a book by an author from a place that I've never read something from before, I'll make sure that I've kind of got a bit of grip of the history and the politics, and not in detail, but enough to sort of inform my reading. Now, when I'm reading something that's a sort of by a UK or American author, I'd probably just sort of rely on my general knowledge, and I wouldn't bother to kind of find out more context. So it was very, very rewarding, if I'm rereading something, to read a non-fiction book around the history of the time and the society, that kind of that strata of society and so on. Yeah, that really added, I suppose, another depth to my reading, and so I appreciated that. Yeah, it really benefited from that extra richness. Now, thinking about rereading, this is one of my bookish, although not book reading, disappointments of, I think, of the very end of July, and that is that the BBC have made I think it's the BBC, probably the BBC. It's almost bad to be the BBC, isn't it? Have made a drama based on A Suitable Boy by Vikram Seth, and that's one of my kind of all-time favourite books, I guess. Something that I read, I don't know, 25 years ago, and I always have a bit of a problem with dramatisations of books that I really liked. But I thought, because I read this like 25 years ago, that's probably safe. You know, I won't be too outraged about them getting little details wrong. But I watched the first episode last Sunday, and I'm going to watch the second episode tonight because I'm fair-minded and I want to give it a decent go. But I was so disappointed that it just didn't match up to the book at all. So I then thought, oh, should I reread the book? But it is like about 1,400 pages or something. So, and I don't feel like I have, maybe that I don't have time in my life for my reading to reread something so large just because I'm watching a dramatisation of it that seems slightly disappointing. And this has got me kind of thinking a bit about my attitude to rereading. Another thing that did was sometime about a week ago, I watched a video that Mark Nash did on BookTube, and he mentioned in that, I think it might have been the DNF tag video, he mentioned in that he doesn't reread much, and that he actually limits himself to 2 rereads a year. And that kind of made me laugh, and I thought, oh, that's very strict, Mark, to specify 2 rereads a year. And then I thought to myself, well, actually, most years I don't reread anything. I mean, there's a whole chunk, as a child I reread things, then there was a whole chunk of 25, 30 years of reading when I barely reread a single thing, with the possible exception of Jane Austen, as I say. More recently, I think I've realised that there were books that I read 40 years ago, and those books may be the same books, but I'm no longer the same person, and that actually there might be a virtue in rereading them now, because it would be a different read because I'm so different, and I have done a bit of that. And that means that if I do reread things, it tends to be classics. You know, it tends to be sort of Tolstoy or Dickens or whatever, things, Hardy, yeah, things that I read, the Brontes, things that I read that far ago, and I'm coming back to afresh. Now, this has got me off on a whole sort of thinking about rereading, and I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a video specifically about that. What I might do is actually make it a tag video, because I've been really enjoying the DNF tag that's going around at the moment. I may well do that, actually. I don't think anyone has tagged me, and I might do it in the form of a tag, because I'm really interested in other people's attitudes and behaviour around rereading. So here's a little request. Do please comment about rereading for you, your kind of a few thoughts about rereading, then that'll help me maybe come up with some good questions and thoughts for the tag, for the video. Or if someone fancies doing a kind of like a Zoom chat about rereading, another booktuber, that would be fun too. So yeah, come on, comment, people. Now, what did I read this month that wasn't Jane Austen July related? Well, one thing that I did was this, which is Of Love and Other Demons by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. And that was actually one of the month's disappointments. Now, it's odd to say that it's a disappointment, because I actually still rated it as a 4-star book. I mean, the thing about Marquez is that he can write a wonderful sentence, and it almost like you could pick almost any individual sentence in this book and you think, wow, that's just brilliant, original, inspired, descriptive. I don't know. But so why was I disappointed? Why, when he writes kind of like superbly often, was this book a disappointment? Well, the reason it was a disappointment is because about 20 odd years ago, no, maybe longer, yeah, I read quite a few books by him, and including 100 Years of Solitude, which was my first encounter with kind of Latin American magical realism, and I was just blown away by it. It was like, my God, what is this? This is brilliant. I've never read anything like this before. This is inspired. I'm thrilled. Yeah, okay. So I haven't read any of his for quite some years, and coming back to one, it was like, oh, this is not as wonderful as I remember it. This is not, it's not having that impact. Now, that could be because I've read quite a lot of stuff in between. it could be because sort of magical realism feels a bit, I don't know, almost old hat now. Although I've read some interesting things quite recently that kind of use that kind of approach, I suppose, that I've really enjoyed. Is it that he wrote this in the 1990s and he was just kind of maybe retreading ground that he covered before? Yeah, I'm not sure why I found it so disappointing, really. But it actually felt like it rambled a bit. So passages would be superb, but the thing as a whole ultimately was unsatisfying. And part of the reason for that, I think, is that I was feeling quite more disappointed with his kind of bad sexual politics than I perhaps was when I read him before. And I think I try hard not to kind of, I don't know, in a very limited way, sort of impose current kind of expectations around sort of that sort of thing on authors from other times and other places. But actually, he wrote this in the 1990s, and what I can happily forgive in a book that he wrote in the 1960s or 70s, I can't stomach so happily in a book that he wrote in the 1990s. Is that fair? What do you think? I don't know. Anyway, a disappointment, despite being good. Yeah. I read 2 authors this month that were absolutely not in any way disappointing. 2 that were quite kind of revelatory new reads for me. One of those is Reni Eddo-Lodge. Now, actually, she's not new to me in that I've read her journalism before, but I hadn't read a kind of an extended piece by her. And the thing that I read was Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race, which is, I think, or it may be knocked off the top spot now, but was sort of #1 in the UK non-fiction charts, which is a very healthy thing, isn't it? Good to hear. Brilliant title for a book, which actually came from a blog that she wrote in 2014, when she just really got to the end of her tether with trying to get white friends, white colleagues, white people generally to kind of, that she knew, or through her journalism and so on, to get them to understand structural racism and what it meant. So, you know, she just, it's that thing where, like, you feel like you're hitting your head against a brick wall, and she decided, I don't need to hit my head against that brick wall anymore, like Sodom. I'm not doing it. It causes me too much pain. Now, she would be the first to recognise the irony that actually that blog and the sort of interest that it inspired has probably meant that she spent more time talking to white people about race than she would have done if she'd never written it. But this book is like her attempt to pull that together in a kind of, it's like almost like a summary history of racism in the UK. So yeah, I guess if you've been around a while in life and have been paying attention, there's a lot in this book that you'll already know. But what she does is she brings it together really succinctly in an organised thematic approach. Yeah, you know, I was there in the 1980s. I can remember, you know, what happened with Cynthia Jarrett or Cherry Gross or whatever. But there are things in here that I did not know. The 1960s Bristol bus boycott, that was fascinating. I had no idea. So, like, the black community in Bristol boycotted the buses because of how racist the bus company was, in that it wouldn't employ black people. You know, so there's like new stuff in there for anyone to read. And also it's just, you know, really, I suppose, useful to be reminded that although you can, in a really well-structured, well-argued, researched form, that however much you may sort of try personally to sort of to not be individually racist, how as a white person you benefit from institutionalized racism and structural racism in your country. So yeah, do read it. The most shocking bit, in a way, for me was reading the essays written by police cadets from Hendon Police College anonymously in, I think it was 1982. They were given the essay topic Blacks in Britain, and you will be horrified by what you read, the bits from those essays, and it kind of, yeah, it's kind of like you know it, but then you read it and you just think, oh God, and you hope we've moved on a bit from there, but actually when you look at the sort of black deaths in police custody today, you know, no, we haven't really, and that's what Reni Eddo-Lodge is trying to explain, I guess. Now, that was a salutary read, but not a cheerful one. The last book I'm going to talk about in July, which was definitely a discovery. Delight may be the wrong word for it, because again, in a way, it's a salutary read, because it's Nightingale Point by Luan Goldie, and it's a novel about not particularly cheerful topic, I suppose, although it said it is also about human resilience. Yeah, so that's the positivity in it. Yeah, it's not a negative book, but it's about an imagined fictional disaster where a cargo plane flies into an East London tower block, and the sort of what ensues. Now, it was interesting because this book came out in 2019, and when the 2017 Grenfell Tower fire was still very sort of fresh in all our minds. But actually, Luan Goldie, who wrote it, she's embedded. The East London is embedded in her. She's lived most of her life there, and that's why she set this book in East London. She's kind of like Scottish Nigerian background, but why she set it in East London, because that's her home and the place that she knows and loves. But the inspiration for the book came from her finding out about a Dutch disaster in 1992 in the Netherlands, because her husband's Dutch. He's from the Netherlands, and she became aware of this disaster where a cargo plane flew into a housing block, and that was her inspiration. And when Grenfell happened, she sort of wondered if she should sort of stop writing the book, but actually then she realized that it in a way she could bring something through continuing with it to the sort of our understanding of the real and very proper anger of the community around, well, the people who were affected by the Grenfell Tower disaster, and yeah, so she went ahead, but she was very keen that she wouldn't be seen as kind of exploiting that in writing her novel, because the inspiration had come from this Dutch event before. Now, as a book, what would I say about this? It's a debut novel. It's one of those books that you could go all kind of literary snobby about this book and pick holes in it, and I've seen some reviews that do that. It has got faults. It's a multiple point of view book. That's something I actually really enjoy, so not a negative for me, but some people felt that not all the characters were equally well developed. Well, that's probably true. Mary, the Filipino nurse, brilliant character. Malachi, really liked him. The two youngest characters, the one who's a young white woman with a very racist and violent and abusive father, she was perhaps felt like a bit of a plot point, I suppose. It's quite, in a way, it's quite an earnest book that's trying to make points. So yeah, she felt a bit like that. And Tristan, the sort of the black teenager in the book, he was, you could tell she knows young people like that, but she slightly was not so successful in writing. Well, she's a primary school teacher, in fact, so I'm sure she does. But she didn't quite perhaps get inside him in a way that felt as realistic to me. But she does a wonderful job writing about a man called Elvis who has a learning disability. That I was impressed by that. But yes, so you could pick holes in that. You could pick holes in its earnestness. You could pick holes in some of what happens towards the end and the sort of how almost the sort of happy ending-ish things she's ultimately kind of pulls together. But actually, I love this book. It was a compulsive read for me. I read it cover to cover, more or less. I found it emotional in a good way. I felt I got that community, the people that lived in that tower block. The first, probably nearly half the book is all one day, the day of the disaster, but most of it before the disaster happens. So you're establishing kind of character and community. Then the disaster is it's written with real impact. Powerfully. But then the second half of the book is like some novels that would be the story, but actually the most interesting bit in a way is the second half of the book when she comes back at intervals to the same selection of characters and looks at 10 days later and a month later and 6 months later and ultimately 5 years later. So I would recommend it as a read, and you can read it and be all like, oh, it's not, but no, it definitely worked for me, and I really look forward to reading some more things by Luan Goldie. I hope she's got other great books in her. So that was one of my July discoveries. August, roll on August. I've got some lovely reading planned for August. August is Women in Translation Month. I've already, it's the 2nd of August as I record this, and I've already finished the book that I began yesterday as the first of my Women in Translation reads. It's Irmgard Coyne, Gilgi, One of Us. Can't wait to talk to you about that. It's a stunner. 5-star book, that one. This week ahead is the ReadEHthon going on. Is ReadEHthon, that's a Canadian joke apparently, but encouraging us to read Canadian books for a week. And there's a book that has been, this book, Indian Horse by Richard Wagamesi, has been on my Goodreads want to read list, perhaps longer than any other, and because it was recommended to me by one of my nephews who's Canadian, and it's I'm very much looking forward to reading it and sharing it with you. Another thing in August is Faulkner in August. If you haven't signed up for that yet, if you see this, it's not too late, because it's run at Bookish, Alan at Big Hub Books and Classics, joined by the lovely Una and Crypto at Codex Cantina, are doing a month-long read-along, a quarter of the book per week of The Sound and the Fury. So join us for that, and have a lovely August, and I'll do another of these at the end of the month.